My name is Justine Kelly. I'm chef de cuisine at the Slanted restaurant in San Francisco, and I've been cooking for 22 years. I've been cooking Vietnamese food for about 14 years. What drew me to Vietnamese cooking, I actually started with this restaurant as their pastry chef. My background is kind of classic French. There is some, there is that marriage of classic French and Vietnamese, yes, but not in our cooking here. So I started as their pastry chef, and then got very interested in what was going on in the kitchen, and slowly started working my way. Yeah, I basically wanted to learn everything that I could, and I started following the owner's aunt around and learning everything that I could from her. So. The family that owns this restaurant is from Da Nang originally, which is kind of coastal southern Vietnam. And the food, mostly traditional to them, street food, things like pho, the soups that noodle soups that everyone's familiar with, clay pot cooking, caramel sauces. We try to stick to as traditionally Vietnamese as possible. Okay. Our executive chef, he likes to call it modern Vietnamese. We draw a lot from local, we do the kind of Bay Area thing of local farmers. Sustainability is really important to us, so we try to do as much stuff with local as possible. But the dishes that we serve are pretty traditionally Vietnamese. There's a dish that we have called shaking beef, which you could probably see on any Vietnamese menu. We do it a little differently here. We do it with filet mignon as opposed to like a cheap cut of meat, but that's a very traditional, you can see it on any Vietnamese menu. The way that the Vietnamese eat is very different from like kind of the Western style where there's meat, potatoes, and vegetables. Usually it's mostly rice. Yeah. I mean, people in Vietnam are poor. So for the most part, and so it's mostly rice and a little bit of meat and more vegetable, and then always with most entrees they serve broth, like either just clear broth or they serve, different from the noodle pho, which is street food, right? It's like the kind of soups that I serve at night here are usually like a clear broth with a little bit of veg in it, a little bit of protein in it maybe, but for the most part it's a very light kind of accompaniment to the meal, and that's partly because there's not a lot of clean water in Vietnam, and so one of the ways that they get their liquids is by drinking broth with their meals. Fish sauce and sugar are in pretty much everything Vietnamese. We basically use it instead of salt. Our pastry chef here does some kind of traditional stuff. There's a lot of tapioca, there's a lot of kind of jello-y based, gelatinous things. There's one dish with basil seed, which is like, there's a lot of soups eaten as dessert in Vietnam. So like warm coconut soup with taro, and then there's like soup and tapioca, or just straight tapioca. Northern Vietnamese cooking is definitely, I think, has more of a Chinese influence. Okay, yeah. Because it's closer to China, partly, and I think probably in the South, maybe, a more Thai influence because, for the same reason. Like the food is not just meant to eat to be consumed and make you full. It has all these other qualities that are good for your body, that are, strengthen certain cheese and. I definitely agree with the fact that you eat to live, you do not live to eat. It's a very different. I think that American culture is gotten really off track as far as the way in which we eat. And the portion sizes. Our chefs here, the Asian chefs, were partly Vietnamese and partly Chinese, but they give a lot of care into the meals that they make for the restaurant, obviously, but also for themselves as their like staff meals. And they all sit together and they take a good half an hour break. I really believe that the way that the Vietnamese cook is the right way to eat.
Okay.
So I think Asian culture in general, but the Vietnamese have definitely have it down. Yeah.